Philip, we have the results of the elections. We expected Donald Trump to win, and to win big, so that's no surprise. It's interesting also that 100,000 people voted in Iowa, and so it's interesting in a democracy how in a country of 360 million people, 100,000 people, 100,000 votes can have such a media impact, psychological impact on the whole of the country. So maybe we'll discuss also the primary system, whether that is something that is still working or not. But let's start with that. Many were hoping that Nikki Haley would become a strong second, and that she might have had a hope of challenging Trump. It didn't happen. What do you make from that? Let's start with the news.
Well, first, Trump carried every county in Iowa except one. It truly was a landslide. I mean, Haley and DeSantis spent tens of millions of dollars to try to lure people, and it didn't work. And it didn't work, in my view, because Haley and DeSantis and Biden as well are all seen as people promising to be better leaders of the current system. And Trump stands apart because he has complete disdain for the current system. And he says more or less, blow it up, I'm gonna fire everybody. Whatever he says, he doesn't really know what he says, he doesn't really care what he says. But it's all about disdain, it's all about sort of riding a wave of resentment. And he's the only candidate talking that way, and apparently some meaningful percentage of American voters, and certainly in Iowa, but not just in Iowa, are receptive to that message.
And why they are receptive to a message that calls for the destruction of the current system that, after all, brought America to be, the superpower, brought the digital revolution, confirms that America is the leader of the free world, built the multilateral system, and so on and so forth. I understand that things are not easy to, maybe the educational system doesn't work, but so what is wrong with this system besides the fact that it's been extremely successful?
First of all, most of the people voting don't remember World War II. They don't remember, all the successes that got us where we are. Just as the people who run universities have forgotten what liberal philosophy is and what free speech means, so too the people who are voting for Trump have forgotten all the things that are important, the rule of law, and all that. But what they see is, and it's sort of what this book is about, what they see is a system that makes them powerless. Where they wake up in the morning, they go to work, they're told, you can't tell a bad joke, you have to go to mandatory DEI training, somebody comes along and says, is your paperwork in order? Not whether you're doing a good job. The local school is out of their control and is probably not very good. They watch the people in Washington do nothing. They can't build a power line that everyone agrees needs to be built. They can't. So they see a system of. Bret Stephens had a column about it Sunday. They see a system of brokenness, and I think they correctly, and this is what again this book is about. They correctly see that we've built a system, and I can explain why, but that not only makes them powerless, it's kind of a double whammy. So they wake up in the morning and they spend so much time doing compliance and all that kind of stuff, but also doesn't work. It doesn't create things. And a lot of people are having a hard time supporting themselves. So you have a system where people working their ass off, they feel powerless, they hate the system, they hate it. And the surveys, I've got survey results here, the surveys all confirm that. Government is the lowest standing in history.
Yeah. So it's interesting, because yesterday we had Martin Luther King Day, which started the civil rights movement and emancipation and all of that. And in a way, 60 years, because his speech was August 28, 1963, so it's really 60 years, more than 60 years later, the claim for freedom of segregation for the black population, which was horrible, if you think about it, it was only 60 years ago, has transformed itself into, parcelized into protections of many individual rights. You address this point, I think, on chapter 3, from the civil rights movement for a system to the individual. So we are now in cancel culture, in woke culture, also wake maybe. But is that what you're trying to say? That we went too far, that the pendulum of the protection of individual right and conforming to a certain behavior, have the pendulum have moved too far on one direction?
It's not that it went too far, it's that we're suffering from system failure. And the system failure is not about the goals, it's not about integration, it's not about environmentalism or any of that. The system failure is in execution. So in the 60s, we woke up to all these abuses: racism, pollution, gender discrimination, unsafe cars, lies about Vietnam, the Watergate era, all that, nothing, assassinations, riots. Coming out of that tumultuous decade, America needed to change its values, and it did. We had civil rights laws and environmental laws and such, all that's fine. But the brilliant people in charge of law wanted to make sure that there were never again abuses of authority. And we changed the way we regulate. So we created 3 things that had never happened before. Instead of telling people they had to have a safe workplace and giving them principles to have tools reasonably suited for the use intended or whatever, we created 1,000-page rule books that tell people exactly what kind of hammer to use, specifying for pages. Saying we gotta have material safety data sheets, and you get a fine if you don't have a material safety data sheet for Joy dishwashing liquid. Anything, if you drink it, that might kill you, which Joy dishwashing, if you drink too much of it, I guess does. So we created this 1,000-page rule book regime that became basically a version of central planning. Then you can't have a rule for everything, so we created processes. A teacher couldn't discipline a student, it might be unfair, unless she could prove in a hearing that Johnny threw the pencil first. Well, how do you do that? And so, and then we got the idea of individual rights. The rights that the framers gave us were a shield. They're rights against state coercion. Government can't take your property away or tell you what to say. The new rights allowed whoever didn't like a decision to claim that their rights were violated and to throw a monkey wrench into building the power line, whatever it was. So rights became a sword. And the result of that over the last 50 years, and it got denser and more red tape, more process. So we literally have a paralyzed system. The political scientist Francis Fukuyama, with whom I'm about to do a big project, calls it a vetocracy, sort of a vetocracy, where anybody can block anything. And so it just doesn't work. It's system failure, and you can't elect somebody to fix it because they don't have the power. You have to actually change the system.
So we'll go back in a moment to the elections then, and to what the prospects are from now on. But let me be provocative, because many people say that we are in this situation of autocracy and adding manuals and compliance and so on and so forth because of the lawyers, because of the legal system and the lawyers, and we have many lawyers here, so I think we put them all on the screen and ask them for defense. So,
yeah, Mr. Spinelli,
you know, the hospital, you know, you can sue the hospital for millions of dollars, and the lawyers would fight that because they can make money. So you never mention the responsibility of lawyers. Do you have some self-criticism?
No, lawyers are wonderful. They're just wonderful people. Lawyers work the system. They believe in the system. Law professors teach all the things I just criticized as the prime virtues of American law.
I'm not talking about the professors, I'm talking about the
and
profession.
the lawyers are.
He's in difficulty. He's
they're-
not finding the words.
The lawyers are tools. The lawyers aren't calling the shots. They're just making money. All of Washington. Washington's filled with lawyers. Covington and Burling, my law firm, the leading firm in Washington. You know, it makes a huge amount of money working the system. And everybody's doing fine in a system that fails. They're doing great. All those lobbyists and lawyers in Washington. You know, Washington hasn't done anything good for 20 years. I mean, you know, what's the number? Or not much. And everybody's doing fine. You know, they're the second biggest
They're doing too fine.
Lamborghini dealer,
Too
second
fine, that's-
biggest Lamborghini dealer in America is in Washington. So, good for the Italian economy. So the lawyers are a problem, but the real problem is, I think, a philosophy problem, and we need a new something to address this, because otherwise we get Trump.
Okay, so let's move to Trump and let's move to the elections. Were you hoping that Nikki Haley might have become a strong second, and do you think that she can do well or better than expected in New Hampshire, where Trump lead with her has been reduced to 7 points? He's 39 and she's 32, and then we have South Carolina where Trump is still leading, but it's her home state and she was governor there. And I keep thinking about her because she has, according to many, better chances of being a competitor than DeSantis.
Yeah.
Do you agree on that?
I do agree on that, and I think that she's a perfectly fine candidate, but she doesn't stand for, she's not somebody who says, this system is broken, we're gonna take it apart piece by piece and make it so that it works for the people. She's not saying anything like that. I've been talking to her staff, I've been trying to sell them on a message like that. I'll continue to try to do that. And because I think that all you need to switch an election is a tiny percentage of the voters, you know, in New Hampshire, whatever. I think she could win New Hampshire because the Iowans are, you know, it's a flyover state. They don't, you know, they're tired of being disregarded by everybody, and so they're flexing their muscle by basically telling the rest of America to screw off, but and by voting for Trump. I don't think the people of New Hampshire like that. So and the governor of New Hampshire is a great guy, Chris Sununu. He's for Haley, so maybe.
So back to Haley and Trump. Trump showed a little bit of nervousness the other day vis-a-vis Haley because she has the support of the establishment, which many people dislike, but the Republican establishment, and she appeals also to many conservative Democrats because she's center, she's a woman, she is minority.
And she's not insane.
And she's not insane, totally, absolutely, exactly. So,
That's not a criterion for American president.
no, it's not the criteria. Exactly.
You can be senile, but as long as you're not insane,
Yeah.
you're the person for us.
Yeah, the founding father is something there. But anyway, so Donald Trump went on the attack and said that she cannot be president because her parents were not American citizens when she was born. And she went on a rage on it, like he did with Barack Obama, saying that, you know, he was not born here, that the birth certificate was falsified, and so on and so forth. Now, the Constitution of the United States, Article 14, Section 1, Amendment 1, I prepared myself for you here, says that whoever is born in the United States of America becomes automatically a citizen. So Trump is lying. Trump is going against the Constitution.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
Yeah, you're shocked. No, but the point is, he goes against, but and yet he gets away with murder.
Right.
So, you know, the fact that people resent too many regulations, or that, you know, they have to behave in a certain way, or everything is codified, may explain why many would like to change the system and Trump wants to break the system. But lying about the Constitution, one would think, would be good. So how do you explain the fact that he gets away with murder? That he says, if I go on Fifth Avenue, I can have a gun and kill someone,
Yeah.
and I would come away with.
Yeah. I think what America needs is Berlusconi, but he's kind of no longer with us. He's the one who give Trump a run for his money. I've known Trump a long time. I've negotiated with him. I've worked against him.
How was negotiating with him?
It's terrible. You can't trust the thing he says. I mean, it's all BS. And at one point he called and tried to get me to change something in an agreement, and he said, you can just, anyway, it's an architectural, big project he was doing, and
We have architects here.
and I was the chair of the Municipal Art Society, so we were involved in negotiating with him. And he said, just let me do this, because it's in my interest to make good buildings, and so I shouldn't be bound by all these strictures. And so he finally stopped talking, and I said, well, I hate to break the news to you, Donald, but people don't trust you. And there was a pause, and he went, no. Like that. Of course they don't trust him. I mean, you know, he's completely, he's completely self-aware. So he has this unique persona of someone who is not expected to be accurate. He's not expected. It's like it's almost like he's a comedian or something, or a carnival barker. He's not expected to actually tell the truth. He's expected to entertain, and when push comes to shove, go and break something, or fire somebody, or whatever.
Or have a tantrum.
Yeah, have a tantrum. Nobody expects that he's telling the truth. It doesn't matter to the people who support him. What matters is his kind of willpower and determination, including his, what's the right word, insouciance, something like that, against the idea of facts or truth. It's not who he is.
Okay, so we will hear more lies from him, and he, in the way you're saying it, because of this unhappiness, systemic decline, he will be unstoppable?
No, I don't think he's unstoppable, but I do think, that's the reason I wrote this book, I do think that if you want to stop him, which in the national election could turn on 50,000 votes, I mean, tiny, less than 1% of the people voting. You need to have, whoever's running against you needs to have a platform that addresses the resentment, the brokenness, and it says, yes, you're right, we're gonna fix it. Because all that person needs is 50,000 votes. And so this book I sent to the head of a Democratic think tank recently, who in Washington, and he generally can't touch anything I write because it's against Democratic interest groups. He's hosting an event with the main media in Washington for me next week on this book, because he thinks that Biden can't win without something like this. that you have to actually create a new vision. So yes, Trump can be beat, but he can't be beaten unless you start talking to some of the people who support it.
So one other thing you mentioned in your book is about the need of giving back authority, that empower people also to do their job, teachers, for example. And yet, there is, especially on the right and on the Trump right, a deep resentment against authority and against the so-called deep state. So how do you reconcile the fact that this Republican or Trumpian Republican want to destroy the system, but then on the other hand, and get, they can get a system that works rather than a system that doesn't work, but then they are against the state, because deep state is, again, a very clever definition that doesn't exist somehow.
Right, neither party has a coherent vision of operating systems of government. The Republicans are against authority. They say less authority means for government. Less authority means more freedom. That's actually not true. Somebody's got to give a permit for the transmission line. Somebody's got to maintain order in the classroom. Some principal's got to decide who's a good teacher and who's not. Got to have authority. Trump has this idea that came out of a paper I wrote, which was a paper that said federal civil service is unconstitutional because it takes away executive power as it's been interpreted by the Supreme Court in many cases. I wrote a paper 4 or 5 years ago. Trump read it. He tried to hire me to do civil service reform. I did not want to. I was on the CEO council for the 1 month that it existed. I didn't want to work with Trump. And so he came up with something called Schedule F. And Schedule F allows him to fire any senior civil servant, any of the top 2,000 or 3,000. And that comes out of this paper where I said he has the authority to do that, which he does. But it won't work because the authority that's needed is not authority at the top, even top civil servants. It's authority at every level. People need the ability to manage their offices. They need the authority down the line. Everybody needs to have the authority needed to do their jobs and be accountable for how they do. And Trump has and frankly, most conservatives, we'll see if the Wall Street Journal's reviewing this book, we'll see if I survive their ideological filter. But they have the wrong idea of freedom. You can't be free in an institution without someone that have authority. If the university president lacks the authority to uphold standards of civil discourse, then students won't be free to actually have a spontaneous conversation, which is what's true at top universities. So I go into all that, but it's true in the system of law. It's all about creating prohibitions of what you can't do, like pollution or discrimination or something. Within that is a field of freedom where people are supposed to be able to disagree and not get along with each other, and that's what freedom is.
And this is my last point, and I open up to the floor. Please come up with any questions you want. But this connects to the crisis of the university presidents and to hypocrisy. So on the one hand, a university professor is fired on the spot, and I'm talking about the head of the psychiatry department of Columbia University, because he wrote a tweet about the beautiful model, black model that newspapers define as the blackest person on earth by her pigmentation, and so it became a sensation everywhere, and she's very beautiful. And he said something like, she may be a model, she may be a freak of nature, but she's certainly very beautiful. The fact that he wrote on a tweet, freak of nature, became a case, and he was fired on the spot from his position. Now we have university professors that, with people going on the campus calling for genocide of the Jews, can do it, and when these presidents of college, one assumes it's the top intellectual representatives of the US go to Congress, they hire lawyers, again, your lawyers are everywhere, I'm afraid, but to prepare them, and they are unable to say that it was wrong.
Right, it's
where are we?
context dependent. Genocide is
It's constant, exactly, it's constant dependent, yes, yes. Which was the phrase that was suggested by some lawyer, probably.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
but so, how do we justify the fact that nothing is forgiven? Someone was fired from Estée Lauder, top manager, because he retweeted something that wasn't politically correct. So political correctness, cancel culture. I think all of us here are for Christopher Columbus, but we have to be aware that we may be assaulted. So how do we justify this with the hypocrisy that then President's University cannot say that it's wrong to say genocide of the Jews?
What we're witnessing in the universities is a breakdown of institutional authority. And the people who run the institutions, this is unbelievable, but literally true, no longer have the idea that it is their job, their responsibility, to set values of discourse, to defend values of academic excellence, and to be able to hold people accountable, even if those are negative judgments, when they violate those values. They don't have that idea. And so what happens is an institution like Harvard or Columbia or whatever, it's got a big pool of social capital and endowment capital, and they're not going to disappear overnight. But you're like pouring acid over those cultures. And I'm just writing a long essay about this. It all comes from this idea out of the 60s that any decision has to be able to be demonstrated to be correct because you followed a rule, or provable by some sort of objective measure in a process. And if someone makes a decision, and by the way, the academy is nothing but this, if someone makes a decision that's, quote, subjective, that is tantamount to saying it's infected with unconscious bias. So we don't have to accept it. And that is now the wave. So everyone's been disabled because the judgments in the academy, most judgments in life, but certainly in the academy, are all subjective. How do you tell who's a good writer and who's not? How do you tell if a paper makes sense under the standards of, economics or psychology or whatever, or not? That's what these professors are. They're experts. Subjectivity is not the enemy of freedom. Subjectivity is the essence of freedom. And what's happened in the university is that by pulling the plug on, quote, subjectivity, that is to say people's judgment, they're pulling the plug on everything that makes the place good. And it can't sustain itself. It results in this kind of mosh pit of people all night long imagining words that might be offensive and then coming in and demanding that the words be changed. I'm amazed that the state of Indiana is allowed to exist and call itself that. These people weren't Indians, they're Native Americans. It should be called Native Americana or something. Or Indianapolis. Literally there's no stopping this. And if you haven't read it recently, it's worth rereading 1984. Because that's what it's about. It's about watching everything you say and condemning you if you have any slip in what you say. And it's about forcing compelled views like the DEI statements that many universities now require before you can even apply for a job. The universities used to represent the best of what the culture had to offer, and now truly they represent the worst.
So nothing is natural because everything is.
Oh, it's everything
some-
from it. No, there's
everything,
no, there's
you
no
know, they
freedom.
think about it. They're
There's
not
no
thinking.
spontaneity. I mean,
And what would have Martin Luther King thought about that? You know, the
horrible.
let the bell of freedom ring everywhere in the country. So this is against that freedom. So
No, freedom in the university means coercion of speech. I went to a talk last year at the Century Club, and I was sitting next to the speaker, who was a young African-American professor at an Ivy League school, and a nice person. She got up to give her talk, and at one point in the talk, she said, as a matter of fact, there's no such thing as cancel culture. So question time came, and I asked, well, don't you think that James Bennett, the editorial page director of the New York Times, who was fired because he published an op-ed
Senator Scott.
by a Republican senator,
Senator
don't
Scott
you think
Thomas.
don't you think he felt canceled? To which she responded, this is really perfect, he wasn't canceled, he was wrong. So you have, as a writer for the Atlantic put it, a whole universe of people who are drunk with self-righteousness. They don't see any of these values, and the only way to deal with them is with the assertion of authority. You have to reclaim the position of deciding right and wrong if you're running one of these institutions, and if they act like they're acting, they must be forced to leave.
Thank you. So this was a good overview of where America is these days. Thank you. Let me quickly open up for questions. Yes, Frank Desiderio.
You have a microphone?
Sure. Here it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful speech. First of all, I'm shocked to learn that a candidate or a president would lie. That's not the most unique thing. But my question is...
Whether he's lying a line, but anyway.
Well,
yes.
that's true, of course.
Yeah.
But my question is, and I think you may have answered it, it's not so much the system, it's the way it's being administered that's objectionable. Is that
No, I completely disagree with that. It is not the way it's administered that's objectionable. If there's a rule book that has 1,000 pages in it that dictates what you have to do, you can't administer it differently. You have to change the rules. If there's a procedure for getting a permit for an interstate transmission line, which has no clear lines of authority of how to resolve disagreements from the 16 government entities that are reviewing it, then you're never going to get approved. It's not how it's administered. It's the fact that no one has authority to make a decision. That has to be actually put in law. So we've created these legal systems that are designed to disempower people from making decisions because we don't trust human judgment. So created these legal systems on these false premises, you can prove what's right or whatever. And so it's like a hamster on a wheel, stuff just goes round, round, round. And it diverts people from how it should work. Australia, a couple of decades ago, like America, had terrible nursing homes. They had a thick rule book that told people exactly how to run it, when they had to serve meals, everything. And someone had the bright idea of scrapping this thick rule book and replacing it with 31 general principles. Respect the dignity of the residents. Have a home-like setting. That sort of stuff. The experts scoffed. They said, all these nursing home operators are going to get away with murder. They went and checked on how it was working a year later. The nursing homes were twice as good. Why? Because the people now went to work focusing on what the residents needed. And rather than complying with the rule book and keeping their paperwork in order, it didn't give the nursing home operator more authority because it was still subject to a regulatory oversight. It gave, if anything, more authority to the residents and their families because they could say, gee, wouldn't it be better here? The uncertainty in those principles made people come together and work things out. We have a system that's where where you pay all these lawyers to be right at the edge. Can I do this? Exactly. You go, oh, they sail all the way to the edge. So you have to change the system.
Thank you.
Of all the questions I'd like to ask, I'll ask you only one, and it goes back to the Trump voters, particularly not so much last night ones, but the ones to come. And it is the following. Yes, he represents the anti-system, at least in their eyes. But unlike 8 years ago, he was president. And people can see what he did or what he did not. So how did he manage to remain or keep this image of anti-system? In other words, I understand the whole reasoning there, but there is a very clear track record or a lack of track record. And I don't understand, I have a hard time to believe, of course we're talking about a hardcore group of supporters, I have a hard time to understand how 8 years later, it sounds like the same as if he was running for the first time. Thanks.
So we talk about the US, in the US, but what about the vision?
Sorry, introduce yourself.
Sorry.
He's a journalist and so.
Maddalena Maltese, Sole 24. Sole 24. And la voce di New York. I was wondering what is your vision of the United States in the international stage? This morning, Sullivan, the advisor of the president, at the forum in Davos, they talk about a new era in which the US has to face the competition and the interdependence. In which way the US can live this new era with this perspective that you mentioned before?
They're looking at emotion, and they're just as driven by trying to shove it to the establishment in Washington and New York as they are for where the government works. They're not doing a calculation of who runs government better. They're doing a calculation of they hate us. They hate the system we created for reasons that are not entirely irrational. And so they just want to vote against that. They want to vote against
Yeah, but I'm sorry, but what Andrea says is that he was part of that system.
I know
He
he's
was part of that system for 4 years.
No,
He failed, he didn't change,
Hey,
so.
he's a failed businessman. He's a lie. No one will do business with him. There's nothing about him that's effective, except that he's a con man. He is a con man.
If I'm right, it's not what you describe, which I understand very well, maybe apply to some of these hardcore Trump supporters. I don't think that the evangelical voters in Iowa want to shower into the. I mean, in other words, I don't think that what they did last night has anything to do with what or much to do. Sorry.
If you look at the issues that people really care about, or they fear. They fear, not crazily, immigration. They fear the fact that if they live in a city, that the streets are inhabited by homeless people, and nobody can do anything about it. Another example of the powerlessness. They fear that that global trade is keeping their wages down, and they're working, two parents working their ass off, and they still have trouble making ends meet. And they want somebody who says, I'm not gonna let that be anymore, I'm gonna put up trade barriers so you make more money. He knows how to talk to these people about things that they care about. Plus there's the general resentment. As to what America's role in the world order, I actually think Biden has done. I mean, I'm not a foreign policy guy. I think Biden's done a very decent job. I know Jake Sullivan a little bit. He's a responsible, smart guy. I know some of the other people in the cabinet. They're smart and working hard and doing a good job. But I think it's obvious that America should be supporting Ukraine. It's obviously in our financial interest to support Ukraine. We don't want to have a a bill 20 times bigger when he moves in on Poland or whatever, or more likely Latvia, where my son-in-law's from. So I think America has to develop, and the parties have to develop, a coherent vision of the world order that starts with what's in America's interest, but it has to be what's in America's long-term interest. And that's just not where the debate is now. It's really, you know, what's happening in Congress is really irresponsible. I was with Joe Manchin 2 days ago talking about some of these issues, and he was talking about the need to kind of steer kind of moderate courses through the demands of, you know, of the world and the world order stuff. And that requires a government that has a keel. You know, you can't steer unless you have sort of the authority mechanisms and the other things that allow you to go in a deliberate direction. If it doesn't work out, tack in another direction. And we're, as a society, and to a certain extent the world, you know, Orban, Erdogan, you know, all these people are all, you know, Berlusconi, you know, they're all symptoms of this kind of breakdown of trust in the, you know, in the order. So I think we're due for a reckoning, and I think people are going to have to get more involved than they have before and begin to talk seriously about doing things like starting new parties, you know, putting pressure on for big change, which is not what big business, by the way, is very good at. They don't like big change. Let me just say in passing, if you want to give me money, that's a really good idea. And
Jay will have to get a percentage, of course.
Right. No, I have a free, I have a card if you want, but we have a newsletter. It's not all the time, but it talks about these issues and with links to different press things. So, and it's commongood.org. And
Okay, just to finish, one last thing. We didn't talk about the Democrats. You spoke about Joe Manchin. There was talk that he would create an independent party. That you saw him. What did he say?
He said that he would not play the position of a spoiler. That he would only do something different or new if he thought he had a path to a victory. My view is that the threat of a third party is itself incredibly important because it allows new ideas to be, you know, raised and disseminated in the media. I can write a book, but you know, but if Joe Manchin or someone says this is important, we have to do it, and by the way, I'm thinking about running for a third party, people will pay attention. So I do think that.
So in the meantime, we're going to have Trump Biden. In the end, you know, we're starting the process, so we don't know, but.
60-40 Trump-Biden, some chance that Biden, if he were smart, replaces his vice president. And some of the names being bandied about include Michelle Obama. That's the end. I don't know if that would help or not. If he replaced Kamala Harris with Gina Raimondo, who is somebody I know and really respect, notwithstanding her Italian
Secretary of
heritage.
Commerce, yes.
You know, somebody like Gina Raimondo is fantastic. You know, when there are talented people, I think the odds of that are very slim, but it would dramatically increase Biden's chances of re-election.
Okay. Listen, thank you. We have so many more questions that we would have, but time is over. Dessert is waiting. So please join me in thanking Howard for having Philip for having come with us and for having given